Hello again, and welcome back to Bible Basics Explained. Chris Langham with you one more time as we explore what the Bible says about faith. We're in Hebrews 11, and today our stroll through the Hall of Heroes brings us to a crossroads. Two paths lay ahead, and we must choose one. On the left, the path is clear and visible, quite easy to navigate by sight. On the right, the path can't be seen. It goes up a hill, and what happens after that is rather a mystery. But the obscured path does come with one bonus, a promise from God of a good land and an invitation to follow Him. So which will it be? Will we walk by sight or by faith? For many of us, we know that the walk of faith is the right one. But how do you follow what you can't see? Well, we are not the first to travel this road. Many have gone before us, and Hebrews 11 reminds us of their stories. Today, we pick up at the story of one of the greatest faith heroes, Moses. Moses' life was a faith journey from birth. Born to Jewish parents at the time of the Pharaoh's edict to kill every male baby. Yet his parents hid him, and Mom set him in an ark among the reeds. When the princess scooped him up, his life took a drastic turn, and he grew up in the palace as a grandson of Pharaoh himself. But in time, Moses faced a decision. Hebrews 11, verse 24. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Two paths for Moses. On the left, live in the palace, enjoy the goods. On the right, join the people of God, mistreated, enslaved. Moses chose right. But how did he do it? Verse 26, he regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. So that's how he did it. Moses wasn't blind. Like Abraham before him, he saw more. Verse 27, by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. Now there's a verse to memorize. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. May that be the caption of my story in heaven's record. Perseverance is a powerful force. It is the one virtue that multiplies the value of every other. Love, goodness, kindness, integrity all become worthless if they cannot persevere. And this is the calling we began with in chapter 10. You need to persevere. And now we see how Moses did it, and so many others. The chapter goes on to Rahab, Gideon, David, Daniel, and many more in verse 33, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. So many powerful stories, so many heroes. Some of them saw victory in their lifetime. Others, in verse 35, suffered and died. That's a harsh reality here. Faith doesn't lead you on an easy road, and it doesn't make the Lord your genie. Richard Wurmbrand said, a faith that can be destroyed by suffering is not faith. That's because faith is more than just believing God is able. Faith is trusting that God is faithful, whether or not he does what we want him to. These heroes of faith went through it and persevered because they saw him who is invisible. And what about us? What about today? That brings us to chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. This is our calling to faith. There is a path marked out for us, a race that we are called to run. The path may be obscured from sight, but we are surrounded by witnesses. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're all watching us. It means that those who went before us testify. Their lives are evidence that this road is worth the trials, that perseverance pays off. But how do we keep ourselves running on the right path? Verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. That's how you run. You fix your eyes on your leader. Jesus is the pioneer. That means that he blazed this trail first. The word can also be translated author. That means that he is writing your faith story, and he's the perfecter. He will finish your story. And Jesus writes happy endings. Fix your eyes on him. How? Read Jesus' story. Watch how he endured, so that you won't grow weary in your own race. And find your story in the Word. After all, Romans 10 tells us that faith comes by hearing, and hearing through the Word about Christ. And that's what we're all about. We call this Through the Word because we walk through the Bible together. But our heart is to build your faith, and that's what the Bible does. So join us again. We have audio guides through every chapter in the Bible and reading plans through every book. Search the reading plans for Explained for more in the Bible Basics Explained series and all of our Bible Books Explained plans. Can't find it here? Join us on the Through the Word app at throughtheword.org. Now, speaking of finishing the story, whatever happened with all of our Romania stories? I should tell you that stories like these happen all over the world. I borrowed these from a group called Voice of the Martyrs. You can find these and many more on their website and in the book Jesus Freaks. I decided to focus on Romania because it has a special place in my heart, and because the founder of Voice of the Martyrs happens to be Richard Wurmbrand, the pastor who spent 14 years in communist prison. So what about him? What did he do with his time in prison? I'll read from his own words. It was strictly forbidden to preach to other prisoners. It was understood that whoever was caught doing this received a severe beating. A number of us decided to pay the price for the privilege of preaching, so we accepted their terms. It was a deal. We preached, and they beat us. We were happy preaching, they were happy beating us, so everyone was happy. Now that's faith. But did his faith pay off? Well, many prisoners' souls were saved, and many of the guards who beat him were so amazed at the joy in the midst of suffering that they too became believers, and they themselves were willing to suffer for their new faith in Christ. But what of the country and the communism that outlawed faith in Romania? Going back to the story we began on day 1, it was December 16th, 1989. In the city of Timișoara, local believers stood their ground to protect another pastor. Soldiers fired. Bodies fell. The survivors knelt in prayer. The soldiers stopped. And as the entire town came out to see, the voice of another pastor rang out from the opera house. The words they heard were the words of a poem. It was titled simply, God Exists. As the people chanted and shouted the words, leaflets were distributed with the full poem. Many knew the tune, and soon the entire town joined in and sang out again and again, God Exists. And that singular event sparked the Romanian Revolution. Within 9 days, the people of Romania overthrew the communist dictator and executed him for genocide. That song became known as the Song of the Revolution. The author was Constantin Ioanid. 4 decades earlier, he had been a man on a park bench, approached by a 5-year-old boy. The kid was the son of Richard Wurmbrand, who had himself once been an atheist, until an old man in a little village prayed a simple prayer to God, because he believed, quite simply, that God exists.
Join us next time on Through the Word as we continue the journey, one chapter at a time. Start your own journey through the Bible with our web and mobile apps at throughtheword.org. Our apps are free, so tell a friend. Chris Langham is the founder of Through the Word Ministries and pastor of Refuge Long Beach in Long Beach, California. And remember, faith comes by hearing, and hearing through the Word.
It was by faith that Moses' parents hid him for 3 months when he was born. They saw that God had given them an unusual child, and they were not afraid to disobey the king's command. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. It was by faith that Moses commanded the people of Israel to keep the Passover and to sprinkle blood on the doorposts, so that the angel of death would not kill their firstborn sons. It was by faith that the people of Israel went right through the Red Sea, as though they were on dry ground. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, they were all drowned. It was by faith that the people of Israel marched around Jericho for 7 days, and the walls came crashing down. It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from death. But others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at, and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prisons. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. All these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised. For God had something better in mind for us, so that they would not reach perfection without us. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. Think of all the hostility he endured from sinful people. Then you won't become weary and give up.